TCU is a waste. They're an absolute waste of a great offense. That's Jake Hatch, locked on BYU Cougars, joining me here to discuss. We're going to get to that game because I want his thoughts on my thoughts, but I want to start with TCU here, Jake. This is just, this gives me 2023 LSU vibes. You've got a great quarterback. You've got a great offense. You're scoring 1 million points, and none of it matters for Sonny Dykes' team. I thought Andy Avalos was a good hire at defensive coordinator. I'm looking pretty wrong on that front because this defense is putrid.
Well, and that's the thing about this is I've watched BYU play SMU, and they shut down SMU with a good defense. Andy Avalos has a very good reputation among college coaches, but his last few stops, including this one at TCU, it's not been it. And yeah, you're right. They are wasting a very, very good offense. Josh Hoover, he's a very, very capable quarterback.
He's awesome.
They scored more than enough points to beat a team like SMU. Because as I said, I've seen BYU shut down that SMU squad. The fact that they allowed 66 points, that's an indictment on TCU and Andy Avalos.
And by the way, against an SMU team that is struggling to find its offensive identity. They've been back and forth with quarterbacks. Are they a tempo team? Are they a downfield passing team? I've watched SMU several times and thought, I don't know what they are. I don't know why Preston Stone isn't the guy. And all of a sudden it comes together against TCU a week after their defense blows a 28-7 lead and gives up a bunch of chunk plays to UCF and KJ Jefferson. I mean, the Knights are a good team, but if you lose one of those games, I can forgive you. College football is crazy. Losing both of those games, man, that's just that requires, if you're going to keep Avalos as the DC after this year, a complete fundamental overhaul of what you're doing on that side of the football and an overhaul in personnel.
Well, see, and the funny thing about this is, remember, TCU under Gary Patterson, what were they known most for? Their
defense. They were the only team in the Big 12 that ever played defense.
So it's incredible to see this have completely flipped to the other side of the football. Now, Sonny Dykes' reputation is, yes, it's offense, but you got to have a defense that can match that offense. And right now, it is absolutely not matching the level that they need.
I came into the season thinking TCU was one of the most underrated teams in the Big 12. They could be a dark horse for the Big 12 title hunt. I said that about Texas Tech as well. Red Raiders looking pretty solid for the last couple of weeks. I won't say for every game because the Wazoo game, yikes, that wasn't particularly good. But I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed in TCU. I'm not mad. I'm disappointed. Horned Frogs, I am incredibly disappointed. But I want to talk about this game that you got to react to, which was BYU Kansas State. So let's get to Kansas State in a moment and start with your BYU Cougars. Okay. My takeaway, Jake, and I'm shocked this didn't land well with the BYU fans, is that BYU is not a Big 12 title contender after this particular game. Every win that you have is not going to look anything like that. I know this because none of the other wins that BYU has had looked anything like that. That was a college football is crazy, awesome, fantastic, amazing, drunk as can be game on Dr. Pepper. And I just didn't look at that and think that's a repeatable formula week in and week out to go win the Big 12, as open as it is.
Okay, you mean to tell me you can't get a punt return that goes for like 170 whatever yards? Okay.
I don't think that's repeatable.
That's a joke, by the way. But no, you're right. The thing is, BYU took advantage of every opportunity given to them by Kansas State. They forced 3 turnovers. They cashed all 3 of them in for 21 points. They did exactly what you're supposed to do when given the opportunity to do that. But you make a very good point, Spencer, that 241 total yards offensively. No, that's not going to get it done every game. And that's one game in the Big 12. BYU knows about hot starts. Remember last year, they were 3-0 out of the gate. They were 4-1. They were 5-2. And oh, by the way, they finished 5-7. This is a team that knows they are just beginning an absolute gauntlet of a schedule. And if they get too high on themselves, they could easily go to Baylor this week, their next opponent, and get beat in Waco. They have to keep perspective in mind. And yes, if any BYU fan out there watching this, and I'll probably talk about it on my podcast as well, believes that BYU right now is a bona fide Big 12 contender, yeah, I'm not buying it quite yet.
No, I just don't see that, they've made the necessary improvements offensively to where I feel like they can go and put up 30 points every week. Now, Jay Hill, we were talking about a defensive coordinator hire not working out in Fort Worth. Jay Hill is going pretty darn well in Provo. I think that hire is being wildly well received, and it should be because defense has been carrying this team. I think Kalani Sitake has always had kind of that edge on that side of the football. And this BYU team, they look good defensively. They kept SMU in check. They forced turnovers against Kansas State. That's going to keep them in games. I just question whether the offense will match that production, because if you want to be a conference title contender, you can't be one-sided. I talked about this with Michigan and their Big Ten title aspirations for this season. I don't think you can just run the football and win a conference championship. You can be good. Yeah. You can just play great defense and you can be good. I'm not denying that. You look at Air Force in the Mountain West over the years. They haven't always had explosive offenses because they don't throw the ball. They only run it, but they play great defense and they can win a lot of football games. When you look at this BYU team, Jake, what do you think their ceiling is for this year?
I said it on my postcast edition of Locked On Cougars, and I'll talk about it throughout this week, is right now I set the expectations going into the season at 6 wins. Get back to a bowl game, I would consider that a successful year for BYU. Now that they're 4-0, I said 8-4. I look at that as a very manageable, I think, expectation at this point. 8-4 is not going to win the Big 12, as you mentioned. But here's the deal. BYU is going to have to find answers offensively. Their running game, it's not operating at peak efficiency. They found a nice option in Sione Moa on Saturday night. He was very, very good in that game, but they still are not running like they need to run to have sustainable success. A lot of this offense is relying on Jake Retzloff not making mistakes. Well, his history suggests that there's going to be mistakes made when he's at the quarterback position. So, yes, they have to find a more manageable style of offense. Their third down percentage still absolutely abysmal. They've been pretty good about converting on fourth down when given those fourth and short opportunities and those go territory type moments, but they have to find a way to stay on the field offensively, grind out some drives. Early on against Kansas State, the Wildcats had a 12 and a 16-play drive that they cashed in for 6 points. So credit to the BYU defense for bending but don't break in that scenario. But the BYU offense only mustered 3 points until Kansas State absolutely imploded late in that first half.
You mentioned the gauntlet that BYU has to go through here. At Baylor this week, Baylor's not a great team, but they're certainly not a bad one.
No.
Hosting Arizona, and Baylor's going to be a little ticked off after what happened last week in Boulder. That was a fun game. Host Arizona, that's winnable. Oklahoma State, that's winnable. At UCF, winnable, but pretty tough. At Utah, host Kansas. At ASU, host Houston. I see one game on there where I say no question about it, BYU's going to win, and that's the Houston game. They're going to win some of those games, Jake, but you can only lose 2. You can lose 2 of those games the entire season if you're going to make the Big 12 championship game. I don't see that materializing for BYU.
And I'm with you on that. It's such a tough run here week in and week out. Now, there's a couple of bye weeks mixed in there, sure. But here's the deal. You have to travel across the country to UCF. Then you have to go and play Utah in Salt Lake City. You mentioned the back-to-back gauntlet of Arizona and Oklahoma State. Yeah, they're very good teams, but having them in back-to-back weeks, that's going to require a lot of effort for you to pull out those victories. And then you mentioned the Arizona State and Houston finish. Those look more manageable in terms of the finish there, but you're right. If you want to play for a Big 12 title, BYU has to manage all of that. I just don't see it happening.
On the flip side with Kansas State, I don't think their Big 12 title game aspirations are done. Now, you take a hit here because you need BYU probably lose 3 games, since Kansas State likely to lose 1 more along the way. But they've got a chance for a bounce back at home this Saturday against Oklahoma State. Then it's Colorado, West Virginia, Kansas, Houston, ASU, Cincy, Iowa State. If you're trying to make your way to the Big 12 title game, Jake, that's about as manageable of a schedule as you're going to find. And sure, they've got to clean up the turnovers. They've got to clean up special teams, everything that went wrong in this game. You can't have that happen again. But I am not writing off Kansas State as a threat to make the Big 12 championship game.
Nor should you. Here's the deal. The big dogs in the conference, Utah, Kansas State, the favorites in the league, got the more manageable conference schedules. They got more of the bottom dwellers, at least perceived going into the season, on their schedule. Kansas State can rebound from this, I think, very quickly, because Avery Johnson, he got rattled in that game in Provo. He will learn from that. He'll be better. That was his first start against a Power 4 opponent on the road. That obviously is a learning experience, and he didn't pass against BYU. He will be better for that going forward, and he won't be as rattled, and the entire team, for that matter, won't be as rattled playing on the road going forward here. I absolutely think they can make a run at the Big 12 title, but they have to, as you mentioned, they've got to be able to make a run here, because you can't afford to have 1 or 2 more losses and expect to be in Arlington.
Jake Hatch, Locked On BYU. Check him out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Jake, that was a good time, my man.
Absolutely. Anytime you need me, my man.